All right. So, have you ever noticed how you communicate differently depending on where you are and who you're with? You might speak one way with coworkers, another with close friends, and still another with family. But it's not just the words, it's tone, timing, gestures, eye contact, silence. These differences aren't random, they're cultural. And this assignment invites you to uncover and make sense of those cultural patterns. In your cultural codes and communication report, you'll act as a communication ethnographer. You'll observe a real world speech community, and then, most importantly, you'll interpret what their ways of speaking reveal about their shared values, identities, and social structures. To guide you, you'll apply some of the frameworks that we have uncovered within the class. Uh, in part, speech codes community, which is in the resources, and then also just any source material from the textbook, including cultural dimensions and worldviews and more. But we'll get into that in a moment. But I want you to begin by identifying a group of people who communicate in patterned, culturally meaningful ways. A speech community, in other words. This could be at a workplace, a family, a sports team, a cultural or religious group, or even a friend group. Through multiple visits or in depth observation, I want you to take detailed ethnographic field notes. So, just for example, what language or terms are used regularly? Who tends to speak first or most? What gestures, facial expressions, or postures seem meaningful? What are the expectations around politeness, disagreement, or storytelling? All of this data matters, but importantly, too, the raw observation isn't enough. The real heart of this assignment begins after you gather the material. So you'll want to just take meticulous notes, looking across all sorts of communicative patterns and events and taking a bunch of different observations so that you can make sense of it thereafter. So the next step is essential. You're not just going to be reporting what you saw, you're interpreting what it means. So that means identifying patterns and asking critically things like what cultural values seem to be reflected in how people speak? How are roles and relationships communicated? Who has authority? Who shows deference? Who takes care of others? Also, are there unspoken rules? For instance, rules about who can challenge whom, how humor works, or when silence is expected. Moreover, you can consider how do people make sense of conflict, express closeness, or manage boundaries, and more. Interpretation is about drawing inferences from what you saw. Just for example, if everyone in a group defers to the same person during discussion, that may suggest a high value on hierarchy or respect for seniority. If teasing is common in another situation, it might signal a norm of indirect affection or solidarity. This is your chance to move from observation to insight. But then, once you've identified and interpreted the speech codes, your next job is to explain them using theory. So, this is kind of the biggest order of magnitude. Once you observe, interpret, now it's time to explain. So, this step is about making sense of what you observed in broader terms. So, what does this group's way of communicating tell us about how communication works in this cultural context? How can theory help make your insights more generalizable? Now, you have a few key tools to work with, including speech codes theory, which was developed by Jerry Philipson. This particular theory, speech codes theory, argues that every cultural group has its own symbolic system, its own way of communicating that reflects its beliefs, values, and social order. And now your explanation should also show just how the patterns of communication you observed help the group create, reinforce, or perhaps even challenge its social norms, its power, the structures, and the shared identity. Next, in explaining your observations, you have all of the cultural dimensions, if applicable, from the textbook to reference. So in some cases, your observations may reflect broader cultural patterns that we've discussed. For example, you might find, and these are just examples, that the group emphasizes group harmony and loyalty, which is a sign of collectivism. You may find, for example, that messages are often implied rather than direct, which is typical of a high context communication culture. Likewise, hierarchies may be respected, or senior members may dominate talk, which suggests high power distances. There's also the possibility that there's an emphasis on clear rules and procedure, which points toward uncertainty avoidance. So these cultural dimensions, which includes individualism, collectivism, high and low context, value orientations, power distance, uncertainty avoidance, and long versus short-term orientations, all of these and more can help you explain not just what a group does, but why they might communicate that way based on broader cultural tendencies. So importantly, you don't have to imply every theory or every principle or every dimension, but I just want you to pick the ones that make the most sense, that are the most relevant and applicable for your setting and your observations that fit the data, and use them to help an audience better understand how the culture shows up in communication for the particular speech community that you chose. So this assignment moves you beyond the surface of everyday talk. You immerse fully into it, and as you observe, interpret, and explain, you'll begin to see how communication shapes our identities, relationships, and worldviews. By applying theory to real-life data, you'll deepen your ability to analyze culture, communicate across differences, and think critically about how meaning is made. So in the end, that's what communication scholars do. We make the invisible visible, and we make it understandable. So choose a group that interests you, observe carefully, interpret thoughtfully, and use theory to help others see what you've uncovered. Good luck, and I can't wait to see what you produce.